Hi, all, and welcome to today's webinar. I'll give everyone a moment to join in, and then in a minute we will start. Hope everyone's having a lovely morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. All right, give everyone just another couple of seconds. All right. Well, hello all, and welcome to today's webinar. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar in collaboration with the GPA. This webinar is Realizing Value from Your Payroll and HCM Integration. Now, my name is Catherine Doyle, and I'm part of the CloudPay team. And today we're going to be talking through this really important topic of integration because we believe that the modern pay experience starts with a unified end-to-end solution that integrates HCM and payroll. When both platforms are operating within a single ecosystem, you can simplify pay processes, reduce manual interventions and errors, and achieve consistent global reporting. But without proper preparation, a project of this kind can be truly daunting. So we've put this webinar together to share with you recommended best practices and top tips to help you achieve a smooth, pain-free journey to a fully integrated and transformative global payroll solution. So let me introduce our speakers. Today, we are delighted to welcome Tom Stevens, product owner of US and global payroll at a multinational financial services firm, Wells Fargo, to learn how his team is gearing up for integration between the Workday and CloudPay platforms. And he will help us to uncover key considerations you should think about before starting an integration project of your own. Now, Sammy Molinaro is a solutions consultant manager at CloudPay, and with 20 years experience in the payroll industry, Sammy has worked in both in-house and provider roles, giving him firsthand understanding of the challenges payroll professionals face. During his 6 years at CloudPay, Sammy has held roles in payroll operations and implementation, and as a solutions consultant, his focus now is on helping prospects and customers extract the full value out of CloudPay's evolving payroll and payments offering. Now, as we go through this webinar, please feel free to add any questions you might have into the Q&A section, and we will try to answer them at the end. And we will be recording this session, so you will be able to access it not only on the GPA website, but also on the CloudPay website at a later date. All right, so let's quickly run through the agenda. Now, we'll start by thinking about why investing in integration is important. What are the benefits that you could achieve for your organization by integrating your HCM with payroll? Then Tom will share a bit about his journey with CloudPay, the challenges and drivers that led Wells Fargo to seek an integrated HCM and payroll solution, as well as his vision for the intended outcomes of the integration. And we'll also dive into recommended best practices for ensuring a successful HCM and payroll integration and reveal some of the common pitfalls that you should watch out for in a project of this kind. Now, I'm going to hand over to Sammy, who will take us through our first point on the agenda.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just to set the stage here, right? So between myself and Tom, we have very unique perspectives on this, obviously, right? Myself, I have managed global payroll for a couple of firms in the past prior to my tenure at CloudPay, so I have some experience with this from, let's say, the customer side of things, the user side of things, but obviously more recently experienced from the supplier side as well. And then Tom is literally going through this journey with Wells Fargo right now. So this will be from the perspective for today's session of, let's say, Workday integration, right, between CloudPay, our system, our payroll system, and Workday as the core HCM, among other modules, right? But a lot of this generally can apply to any endeavor like this with any two systems in place, specifically in the payroll and HCM space, right? Because some of the feedback here will be unique to that, but you can really apply a lot of this logic and a lot of the tips that we'll share with you today too any of those areas. So with that said, where we wanted to start here was with the why, right? Essentially, why do we do this in the first place? Why do we have, customers and potential customers coming to us asking for this? Why are we out there seeing this happen so often? For some context, I think CloudPay, we've propped up something like between all the different HCM systems that we integrate with, I'd like to say somewhere upwards of 3,000 or so integration systems between our system and HCM platforms for various reasons and to various levels of strength. So there is a lot of history behind a lot of these findings. The why is a big question. I think some of these will be quite obvious. But really, when it came down to, when Tom and I were speaking, preparing for this session, we settled on essentially these 5 areas as areas that we both have experienced from our perspectives as to, why you go down this road in the first place. So I'll expand upon some of these here, right? So the first one should be quite obvious. I would say out of if I were to ask someone a top 10 reasons around this, I would say unequivocally this is going to be in the top 2. We saw this when we ran a survey on this ourselves recently. So we were at the Workday Rising event in San Francisco this year recently, and we ran a survey on the floor. If any of you happened to be attendees there and came to our booth, you would have seen this. And this was in the top 2, right? Why do you do this? What are the challenges, essentially? One of the biggest challenges in payroll in general is manual processes, human error, the ability for data integrity loss, essentially, right? So automating, of course, goes a long way in reducing that risk, reducing those number of errors, reducing manual tasks on the plate of the payroll practitioners. I will say, as a payroll person my whole career pretty much, we do love our spreadsheets, and it's not always easy to peel us away from that. But I think once you can demonstrate the value and provide some clear messaging and guidance as to how our lives will look post automation and what we can actually start focusing on. A lot of us who are payroll practitioners, yes, we like our processes, we get set in our ways, but we're also often very nerdy about payroll. So as long as you can provide us with ways to, I would say, flex that muscle, then we're happy to adopt the change, essentially. So there's a lot of value here, of course.
Yeah, and Sammy, I think it is a cliche, but it is also true that when you're spending all this time on manual processes, you're really doing work that adds little value. And what I have found over the years is the cliche is true that when you're no longer doing these manual tasks, you're able to focus on things that give you a much higher return on your energy. And also the mathematics of manual processes, human nature, the more you do manually, you're asking for an error to happen. You're hoping it doesn't happen, but you're asking for it to happen. And also I've seen where it can be as simple as 2 or 3 people want to be out of the office on the same day, and you have to choose one of them to stay behind and say, you can't do that because it's our critical processing day and you've got to handle this spreadsheet. So by automating this stuff, you really do free up people to do more valuable things. And And it's not just payroll practitioners or operations people on my product team. We get bogged down in manual stuff too, and it really frees everybody to make this stuff happen without human intervention.
Yeah, you brought up a good point that honestly, people in payroll, we don't think about it enough. The fact that vacation time exists,
Yeah,
we don't experience that historically. We don't experience that. We get so used to the fact that we're just essentially on call, unless the banks are closed,
yeah,
we're on duty. So yeah, freeing us up, absolutely. Creating a little bit more wellness in the lives of payroll practitioners. Although they may not realize it, it's obviously going to benefit them in the long run, which goes a long way. And then, yeah, strengthening process control. So what we really mean by this is having, let's say, auditable, trackable processes in place, essentially, right? So rather than playing he said, she said, and looking at spreadsheets and trying to determine where something potentially went sideways, if data integrity loss occurs, how did that happen? Where did it happen? Who was the user? How do we drive action? So why do you invest in an integration? I mean, one of these things hopefully is that an outcome is now you now have a trackable workflow from of your data essentially from point A to point Z or point Z if you're across the pond, right? So that you can actually see when data was touched, where it went, where it landed, time and date stamped, all of this, hopefully across all systems involved, essentially, so that you now have a much more strong control process in regards to your payroll process flow. So of course, this is always going to be a big win whenever you connect two systems and remove those touch points.
right. And being in a institution that I think probably today we're still considered in the too big to fail category. We do have a fairly high level of scrutiny, concerning pretty much everything we do. And Sarbanes-Oxley, other banking type regulations at play. And for us, it's great to be able to trace a pay transaction all the way back to the manager approved this compensation change, it's valid, or a manager approved this payroll input, and we can follow the automated trail of everywhere that transaction has gone, and there's no weakness in the control, and there's no no gap in the audit trail of that data, which is really fabulous for us.
Yep, love to hear that in practice. And then, so this third one, right? So we don't hear everyone talking about this, to be quite fair, but certainly anyone under the office of the CHRO or the CPO, if you're in people, this is your most likely primary outcome you're trying to drive. It's debatable whose initiative adopting a payroll system is. Do we report up through finance? Do we report up through people? Are we our own voice within the organization, which we're seeing more and more, which I love personally, selfishly, right? But whose initiative is that is debatable depending on how your organization is structured. But with your HRIS, it's pretty clear this is a people initiative, right? So driving adoption of that tool that will most likely be your most broadly utilized tool within your organization with every single employee, ideally interacting with it. Extending the adoption of that is huge. So in the integration, specifically with Workday, right, between Wells Fargo and CloudPay, it's not just about the data that you can pass across to payroll to be able to control that payroll process flow. It's also the data that can be pushed back into your HRIS, right, for employee consumption. And that's what drives that adoption. If employees are consuming their pay slips and their tax documents within Workday or within your HRIS, this is huge towards driving people towards that tool. So any other initiatives that you're trying to drive out of your chosen HCM system, your chosen HRIS, becomes a lot easier to drive adoption through if your people are already organically transacting in there to grab their pay slips and tax documents, which they will, right? So this is a big buy-in towards tool usage in general.
Yeah, this for us is just a huge win, and something we haven't fully realized the value of this yet, because a lot of our international population their year end is going to be later on after after we've implemented these integrations. So, but the ability to get tax documents and pay slips in Workday with the mobile capabilities and the different on-network and off-network capabilities that we allow our employees to have, this will really get us much closer to a one-stop shop for everything self-service for our employees.
Yeah, indeed. It's the message we're always pushing whenever we're going down the road of investigating an integration with any of our customers. This is one of the primary areas that we focus on. We're typically talking to people or HR, right? So this is a strong message across the board. We hear that feedback all the time. Driving efficiency, this one should be pretty straightforward, but I will say this is the number one piece of feedback that we typically get around what the challenges are and what an integration could potentially solve or has solved is the efficiency of systems and processes, right? Driving down the number, let's say, and this is often why you're going down this road as a business in the first place, right? One of the first things that we ask, when we first talk to a new prospective customer and they're looking to consolidate their payroll processes into one vendor, and we're happy to be in the room in that conversation. But the first question we ask is, have you already gone through this evaluation on the HCM side? If you haven't, we're happy to ask our prospective customers to slow down the conversation with us until they've potentially selected an HCM that's fit to purpose globally, and then attach us to that. Because we see from a payroll perspective, we see the HR system as the upstream. If we're looking at a payroll workflow, everything flows through from the source to HCM down to the payroll system, and then ideally symbiotically back to HCM, but also downstream to the finance system as well. So we feel that we sit in the middle of that. So that's the first question we ask is, have you evaluated HCMs first? Go down that road first. But that's the whole point that we're trying to get to with that line of thinking and that line of conversation is what you want is as few systems as possible, as few processes as possible, as few data sets. We don't talk about this enough. Not until I would say we're in the weeds of conversations do we really cover this. But when we say efficiency of one data set, is there a possibility to potentially consolidate your global wage types, your pay codes? I know everybody, if you're a payroll practitioner, you're thinking taxes are different in every country. There's no way to do that. We can't possibly have one data set, but you might be surprised. We work with plenty of customers who've done this and gone down this road to the best of their ability. All right, tax codes will always be disparate, but there's a lot you can do to consolidate your general wage types and pay codes, right? So there's a lot that can essentially be consolidated as part of this transformation, and that's just one piece that we feel has value. But that's the end goal, right? Is to improve efficiency, reduce number of processes, number of systems, number of disparate data sets. And then this all kind of wraps up in a bow here. All of this essentially supports more agility in the ability to scale. If you're growing through M&A, which is more challenging, right? If you acquire a business and they already have their own HRIS, their own payroll system, it may be a little bit more challenging to have that change adopted by the new population, the new processes. We understand that. But even with that, especially if you're growing organically at a quick rate, if you're expanding into new countries, new geographies, things of that nature, it's much easier to do so if you've already established a global process that covers, 90+% of what you need to do and what you need to deploy as you grow. And then you can essentially, it's not always as easy as lifting and shifting, but you can get as close to lifting and shifting that into your new geography as you scale. Okay, so we've already done a lot of talking about what we think are the reasons that you would deploy, an integration between systems, but we want to hear from you. So Catherine, over to you for our first poll.
Yes, so this is the first of 3 polls that we're going to be going through in this webinar. And just so you know, when we launch them, you will see a screen pop up in front of you, and we'll give you a moment to answer this poll, and then we'll go ahead and share the results. So I will go ahead and launch this first one right now. And we are looking at, if you are planning a payroll or HCM integration, what are your main drivers?
Yeah, so what are the efficiencies that you're trying to gain? What and it's probably multiple of these for all of you out there, but what's the key, right? What was that key that actually turned the ignition, so to speak, right, to actually drive you down the road in the first place? Is it cost? What's the primary? Is it cost? Is it time? Is it process? Or is it customer service, essentially, right? So improving the employee experience. Everyone in people essentially are in customer service for their base, right? So where was the primary gain that you were looking for? I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of polarized. Either you're not doing this at all or it's everything, right? We want all of it. But I'd be very curious to see, what is the actual primary motivator here?
Yeah,
What do you think it was for you, Tom, if you had to pick one?
Definitely cost effectiveness and saving money, and and second with that would be improving the employee experience.
Yeah, makes sense.
all right, I'll go ahead and end this poll and then share the results.
Yeah, there it is. Everything,
I,
right? We
I
want it
like all
all.
of the above. Yes.
Exactly. We want everything. We want the most we can. That's the whole point. So we're glad you're here. That's the whole point of this webinar, is driving the maximum possible efficiency out of a journey like this, right? So hopefully at least something that we're able to share with you today can provide some food for thought along those lines. But appreciate the interaction and the feedback. We like to hear where you all are at. Okay, so Tom, the star of the show. I'm sure everybody's here because they want to hear what has Wells Fargo done? What are you guys doing in this regard? So over to you, sir, to
All
go
right.
through
Well,
your journey.
sure. Thanks, Sammy. Um, so this CloudPay to Workday integration is an incremental step in a long process that actually started multiple years ago for us. We had been, for our core HCM and payroll and benefits administration engines, we had been on PeopleSoft for about 30 years. And I don't think it's any secret to anybody on the phone that, or on the webinar, that the future of PeopleSoft is somewhat unsure and uncertain. And so that was factor number one. Factor number two was the fact that owning and operating a data center is becoming more and more expensive, more and more complex, more and more risky due to data intrusions and security concerns. And then the third thing really is it's at least 10 to 15 years ago now. It became very, very obvious that the future of software was going to the cloud, that you could still remain on premise if you chose. You could find a way to do it, but if you really wanted to take advantage of the latest and greatest that the vendors were offering, you were going to have to come up with a cloud strategy. So that set Wells Fargo onto a journey, we'll call it, where we evaluated not only the software marketplace, particular software offerings, but also we set out to rationalize the number of vendors that we were using, the number of applications as a whole, and so off we went on. The new industry buzzword, I'm sure now, is transformation. So we took off on a transformation journey, and that landed us at Workday. So we went live on Workday on January 1st of 2022. And so that was our core HCM. We're payroll, we're time and attendance, we're benefits administration, compensation, talent management, talent acquisition, pretty much the whole package. And then simultaneously, we evaluated the the landscape for our outside of the U.S. payroll, and we're in about 17 to 20 countries, somewhere in there, and had been a CloudPay customer for about 10 years. We had never been to the point of automating the integration between PeopleSoft and CloudPay. We were depending on Sammy's beloved spreadsheets and reports, some cases maybe even email, going back and forth, and so there was not a whole lot of efficiency there. But evaluating the international marketplace, we really settled on CloudPay for the footprint that we had already been on for that 10 years, and really found that CloudPay to be a very, very compelling value proposition for us. Your responsiveness to the market, your dedication to security, and exemplified by things like adopting Amazon Web Services for some hosting and security and so forth. So we found the CloudPay offering to be really a strong value for us. Now that was settled, the next step was to go all in on the standard Workday functionality and take advantage of the solutions engineered by CloudPay and Workday for automation. And so that is our next step in that process. And we've not gotten yet to the point of importing payslips and tax documents, but we're on the cusp of that, and really looking forward to that. So we have we've got a much more efficient and a much more supportable platform. As I had mentioned in some of my earlier comments, we are able now to redeploy people to more strategic and more value-added tasks rather than hand-holding these manual processes. And we have great auditability from start to finish, and we have the controls that we're really needing. So, and then Sammy and I, we were talking about this last week, and we were both at Rising and saw each other, and we're in a lot of the same sessions. And what really impressed me was watching the roadmap for that Workday is advertising and what they're working for, and seeing the commitment from CloudPay to keep pace with that, to adopt as much of the new Workday functionality as they can at a reasonable pace. I know keeping up with Workday sometimes can be a challenge, but in a good way. Keeping up with the innovations. But that's really where we are, and what we're really looking forward to, and making this a really good experience for our employees, and allowing our payroll practitioners to work on the most valuable things. So
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom. Yeah, anyone out there who is a Workday user yourselves, or attended Rising, or is keeping up to date with the, I would say, emerging functionality of Workday, you'll already be hearing the whisperings of evolution beyond their current peachy standard for integrations to direct APIs, right? So things are always changing. Technology is moving at breakneck speed. CloudPay, absolutely, we're trying to keep up with all of that. We're doing our best to make sure that we're always at the forefront, that we're one of the early adopters of anything that's emerging, but that we do it in a way that can truly support the customer base. So Tom, we definitely
yeah.
appreciate your words from your perspective there. Tom is not a paid actor, so he gave his own time to come here and give this feedback touch, which we truly appreciate. Okay, so that's the Wells Fargo story, essentially, as we've gone through this. Let's talk about a little general best practices here, right? We've talked, there's a lot of Workday in the conversation here. I'd like to zoom out a little bit from there, right? I did say, like, a lot of this is essentially applicable regardless of your vendor choice, and that counts for your payroll and your HCM vendor. So a couple of things that we've noticed over the course of our business, over the course of our growth, of best practices to go into this. And it starts with vendor review. So right on topic there, it all starts with that vendor review and selection, right? So we saw on that last poll, everybody's trying to drive literally every efficiency out of their integration. So it's very likely a lot of you have already landed with chosen vendors from both perspectives, payroll and HCM. But for anyone out there who has not yet, you have the opportunity, if you're just starting to look to standardize and globalize and your business is growing and you have untenable, disparate processes, too many systems, and you're just now evaluating, you have the opportunity to include a lot of this mindset in your vendor review strategy. So it really does start there if you have the opportunity to be at that stage in your growth, I would say, in your development as a business. It's trying to create symbiosis between processes and systems, not just the integration itself. It goes beyond that, but that's a bigger conversation that I'll save for another day, right? If we stick just to the integration strategy here, then it's in ensuring that the from a payroll perspective, the upstream system being your your chosen HRIS, and your downstream system being your payroll platform, that there's a symbiotic approach, I would say, to service delivery and to processes from within the systems themselves. It's about being able to actually eke out the full value of what the integration enables you to do, essentially, right? So going back into the Workday conversation a little bit, what Workday has done very well is developed a very, very standard approach to the way they integrate with third-party systems, right? There's a certification process. There's a very, very easily digestible data dictionary. The capabilities are clear. It's a matter of whether your chosen vendor that attaches to that system can help you realize those capabilities. So it's about just evaluating effectively, understanding the outcomes you're trying to drive, and then understanding how to get that out of your vendor as you're evaluating. Effective
Yes.
change management. Oh yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't overemphasize that vendor review and selection, because these transformational types of activities, they're multi-year efforts. They're pretty intensive as far as effort and expense or investment, and it's difficult to change once you've made that selection. So, finding a good, reliable vendor who's financially secure and dedicated to the right things, and dedicated to keeping on the leading edge of technology is critical.
Indeed, indeed. It's our philosophy on our side of things, absolutely. Right, so change management. This is a big one. I think I could probably talk for an hour just around change management, to be quite honest with you. This encompasses a lot of things. I'll try to keep this focused to just the strategy around, deploying an integration, but there's a lot that goes into this, and it can really apply to any project. So I'll try to give you some tangible feedback here from my experience. I've led many projects on the vendor side to completion, and quite a few from your side, I would say, of things, from the customer side as well. This is everything from the top down. So as you go into, I would say, an implementation, deployment like this, it's about carefully selecting your stakeholders, right? First of all, identifying those stakeholders internally who are going to be critical to the success of the project, and getting their buy-in first and foremost. but also understanding, being honest with yourselves as a business as to whether or not you have the right personas in-house to drive the deployment of this. Do you need to bring in outside help temporarily to help drive this forward? If so, don't be afraid to do so. Don't be afraid to ask for that budget. And on the topic of asking for budget, the buy-in really needs to come from the top down here. It's funny, we hosted our internal customer event just last week in Barcelona, which is why if you're seeing me go on mute every now and then to cough, I apologize. I also have an 8-month-old son, so that's my excuse probably for the next 5 years of having low-grade illness. But we just had our customer event last week in Barcelona, and a lot of the sessions that were customer-led were around this topic or made their way back to this topic because this was most of the questions from the floor we're coming from this perspective. Okay, we're hearing you say what you want to achieve and how you achieve it, but how do you get the buy-in? How do you retain the buy-in? What happens when someone's not on board? Payroll doesn't necessarily have a voice with the CEO in our organization. How do you start that? We had a very tongue-in-cheek. We had a very cheeky response to that from one of our customers, which was just knock on his door and introduce yourself. But the reality is you need to make yourself visible within the organization, get the buy-in from the top down. If you're the one driving this within your organization, regardless of what your title is or who you represent within the business, if you're the one driving this, you need to make yourself visible to leadership and obtain their buy-in. Essentially, you need their backup in order to drive this forward because you will hit challenges. Inevitably, there will be challenges no matter how well you plan, no matter how strong of a project manager you assign to this. Things will go sideways at some point with a deployment of this scale. You will run into barriers. You need to be able to break through those barriers effectively and not slow things down, and create that knock-on effect of delays that we all know the domino effect that can have to a project. So it's about getting the buy-in, assigning the right resources, getting those resources buy-ins, making sure that everyone is effectively communicated with. That's your team, that's management leadership within your business, and in this case, that's your entire employee base. Making sure that your employees understand what these changes are going to be, how it's going to impact them, how it's going to improve their lives. There's a lot that needs to be done here. A lot of it is in comms and effective communication. But as long as you drive that and you drive it well, then you're setting yourself up well for success.
Yeah, absolutely, Sammy. I think and I'll add just a little bit. I think the words I've heard the most over the last 3 years has been, well, PeopleSoft did it this way, and I want it to work this way. And those of you who've been through a Workday implementation, you know that Workday and PeopleSoft don't necessarily work the same way, and in most of the time, I would say that's a good thing. And change is good, but be prepared for those who don't want any disruption or don't want any have to evaluate any of their business processes or change any of their business processes. I've been in software development in some form or another for significantly over 30 years, and this has just been one consistent thing my entire career is people wanting software to work exactly the way they think it should work, rather than being somewhat flexible and saying, maybe these software vendors know what they're doing and they have a good standard process. And especially when you're talking about now making an HCM system talk to an external payroll provider, if they're both attempting to use standard processes as much as possible, and then they build a connector between the two of them, chances are good you're going to have your best outcome if you conform to those standard processes. So I think that's really worth a lot of investment of time and energy on your part, is to have those challenging, difficult conversations about the world is changing and we need to conform in some form or another to how these ERP standard processes work, and we're going to have the best outcome, especially for things that aren't externally customer facing or revenue generating for you. Payroll is not our bread and butter. It's not what distinguishes us from other banks or other employers. So, using standard processes as much as possible makes all of our lives a lot easier.
Indeed. What a segue, actually, right into desired outcomes. But yeah, no, it's not a revenue generator, but it is most likely the business's largest expense and can be the business's largest liability as well. So it's definitely an important piece of the puzzle. It's a core piece of the puzzle. It's just about us who are managing this process, making sure that that's visible and our voices are heard, essentially, and the weight is assigned as necessary, essentially. But yeah, so the desired outcome. So Tom just touched on this. It's understanding what those are. So coming out of the gate, so before you even start down this journey, your vendors that you're speaking to will tell you what the strengths and weaknesses are, what the values are, but you should really do your best to understand internally, because only you understand your own business to the degree that you do. Any strong vendor who you're evaluating will come to the table and do deep dive discoveries with you, try to learn as much as possible with you. But even if we sit and have conversations for 6 months prior to you determining you want to move forward with CloudPay, there's only so much we can learn. You know your business more intimately than we ever will. You know your business more intimately than any of your vendors ever will. So understand what the desired outcomes are, and they can be varied, and then stick to that. Stick to that target. Plant that target on the wall firmly and stick and just move always forward towards that target. We heard a message. So CloudPay just recently brought in a new CEO, and he spoke to us at our customer event last week. And one of the things that stood out to me that he said that's one of his philosophies in life that I actually took to heart was, choose your direction carefully first and then increase your speed. And that's exactly right when it comes to a deployment like this. Take the time to determine what your direction actually is with this, and then accelerate in that direction and don't veer off course. Once you have made a decision as to what the outcomes are that you're driving towards, do not deviate. Do not try to pivot at the last minute. Don't have suddenly, because someone has a bright idea, don't try to last minute wedge that in and implement something that was not planned originally. Trust me, there will always be the opportunity post deployment, post initial deployment, when everybody succeeds and everybody can have their champagne and celebrate, to then drip feed additional functionality or potentially pivot the direction post deployment. Always keep your eyes on the goal once you've set those goals in motion, and keep your team aligned in that direction as well. If they have a good idea and you're going to deploy that in the future, communicate that to them, but make sure that they stay on task first, and then we can tackle that next down the line. And then aligning this, right, so that there's no overlap with other projects within the business. I'll keep this focus to the actual team who you've assembled, right, to actually be involved in the implementation and the deployment of the integration. So ensure that these people have enough free time in their calendars to actually achieve these outcomes, right? Oftentimes, your subject matter experts here will be key IT individuals, key payroll individuals, right, who have a day job that is extremely intensive in a lot of cases, especially the larger you are and the more lean you are, right? From a process management perspective, these people have a lot on their plates. Make sure that that time is set aside to achieve these outcomes. And again, like I said, if you need to bring in temporary help externally to help drive this forward, don't be afraid to do so. We see a lot of customers go down that path, at least throughout the implementation, right, and the deployment process. So understand whether or not you actually have enough time to achieve these outcomes, and that your team has enough time to achieve, right? What you don't want is them to be spread so thin that there's no way that they're going to actually go over this with the fine tooth comb, I would say, that it requires in order to deploy it successfully. Okay, so some best practices there. Again, we're talking a lot. We're telling you things. We want to hear from you again with another poll here. So just like the last poll, this will run the same way. So Catherine will get this all set up for us. But if you are on this path right now, how far along are you on this journey? We'd love to know who we're really speaking to right now and how this really applies to your real world scenario, right? So are you not really deploying an integration at all, and you're just kind of peripherally interested in the content today? Are you thinking about it, just getting started? Probably the best place for you to be to absorb some of this today. Are you just now planning? Are you in the planning phases, beginning to deploy? You've made some decisions, and you're assembling your team, and you're on the journey now. Or maybe you're already in the middle of implementation. Maybe you're already in the middle of rollout, or you have an integration already live and kicking, hopefully doing a whole lot more than kicking if it's already live. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you as far as, what is your position as of today? And hopefully that can color some of the wrap up in the session as well. I have no idea what to expect on this one. I would expect all over the map.
All right, it looks like people stopped answering. I'll go ahead and share the results.
Okay, clairvoyance apparently. Wow, I'm surprised to see that the majority, by a small margin, are not planning an integration at all. You're just here to absorb, here to learn. I love that. You're just peripherally interested, seeing what you can get. I'm sure you saw Wells Fargo was going to be on this call and said, I have to be on this webinar. Good choice. Okay, thank you for that feedback. All right, so last big piece of content from our side, but we will poll you again for some more feedback on the tail end, and we'll have some parting thoughts to share with you as well, hopefully some time for some questions. So we'll keep this one a little bit lighter touch. Some of this are in areas we've already spoken about. So we just talked about not overcommitting your teams, but more broadly, from a more zoomed out perspective as well, not conflicting with other business interests internally. The last thing you want is to start going down this road and allocate budget and get the buy-in and start moving, and all of a sudden leadership pivots into a different direction, budget is reallocated, right? There's another project that takes priority internally. I think we've probably all experienced this in our careers at one point or another, where you think it's going to be one timeline and all of a sudden it turns into another timeline. But so there's only so much control we can all have over this. But again, I think this is about being visible to leadership and being in communication with leadership so that you can get as ahead of this as you can. You can't control from the top down what direction your business goes in some aspects, but what you can do is be aware as early as possible and try to mitigate, right, any effect that it has to your project and trickle that down to your teams. And then clean data. Okay, so this is one that Tom and we just keep coming back to and talking about every time we get together and discuss this topic. So Tom, I know you have things to say here, but I wholeheartedly agree. Set up an integration to support a strong process, to support a clean data set. I know this is going to rub some payroll practitioners the wrong way when you dig in and start. All of a sudden, you want to have eyes on how clean everything is, the process really working as smoothly as you always tell us it is. Does the process really make sense? Is the data really as clean as it can be, as efficient as it can be, as consolidated as it can be? There's always some work that can be done here in any organization, no matter how strong of a team you have. Just again, get the buy-in from those payroll people, help them understand, this is no one's coming in to slap you on the wrist. We're trying to improve your life, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely, Sammy. And we had a lot of experience with this being an on-premise PeopleSoft implementation for 30 years. We did a lot of customization, and that kind of allowed us to skirt around certain data integrity rules that were built into the software. Or when we moved from one platform to another, we found we needed a lot more data integrity, for Workday to function the way it is intended. So you really do set yourself back when you do not take the time to clean your data. And if you even go further and say, my data is not the greatest, so I'm going to accommodate this poor data quality by circumventing some configuration or adding some super complicated configuration to accommodate that, you really are setting yourself back for years, because you'll always have to carry that forward with you from that point on. So when you're investing the time and energy to do this kind of work and getting multiple systems talking to each other back and forth, really emphasize that data integrity. And Workday is really good about enforcing data integrity and requiring data integrity. Don't do anything to defeat that. Embrace it and run with it and get yourself in a really good cleaned up condition, and it'll pay dividends for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And conversely, you will feel the pain down the road when inevitably things will change in the software landscape and you've propped up something custom and now all of a sudden that breaks when the standard changes. I mean, that will happen eventually.
Yeah.
Okay, so resources, time, and expertise. We already spoke quite a bit about this, but this is, potential. These are essentially potential areas of pain, right? Potential areas that will cause delays, cause derailment in the the process itself, in the implementation of the integration between the systems, right? The time and expertise of your resources. Again, this is just doubling down on what I said earlier. It's about choosing those people carefully, understanding where their areas of expertise are, and supplementing that if you need to. No one's going to be offended if you improve their lives in the long run. Trust me. It may be momentary, but they'll get over it when they see how much easier things are. And as much as you might ruffle some feathers when you bring someone in to all of a sudden teach someone who may have been sitting in that seat running that payroll process for 20 years, they will still learn from that additional resourcing that you bring in, and you'll magically see them apply some of that learning to how they move forward essentially. So it's a positive in the long run if that's required, but it's just about understanding that fully and making sure that that's deployed right from a personnel perspective. And project management, I can't stress this enough. I think I went really into this earlier. I was getting passionate about change management, but an effective project manager sitting in the center of this. And beyond that, a sponsor, right? Sometimes that person is the ultimate responsible party for the success of this project may also be the same person, right, who's sponsoring the project. It depends on the size and, I would say, organizational layout of your business, but often they're not. So it's beyond having a strong project manager who can keep everyone to task and keep everyone on timelines and not missing deadlines and all of that. It's having a strong executive sponsor within the business as well, who is responsible to the highest level within the business of the success of this, and will be that ultimate point of escalation, drive things forward if you do run into challenges that are larger than minor, let's say. So wrapping this all up into a bow, it's really just about being as prepared as you can. Like we said, you can plan all day. There will be curveballs, but it's about, if you can plan out 90% of this and be ready for 90%, and then all you need to deal with essentially are the 10% curveballs that may come in, right? That you now need to, re-strategize, organize around. That's great. Then to me, you've succeeded, because that will happen and you'll need to pivot and you'll need to be strong and able to pivot on the fly if necessary. But if you don't have a strong process behind that, and the 90% of that isn't covered off and standardized and prepared for successfully, then you're really going to have a challenge on your hands when inevitably you are met with challenges right along the way. So it's just being as prepared as you can and being more agile and being able to pivot when necessary. Okay, and with that, that's everything we had to share as far as content is concerned. But a last poll. I hope everybody's still awake, still with us, because we want to hear from you one more time. And we'll run this poll just like the last few, essentially. We're telling you what we think the challenges are. Again, right? We're talking at you a bit here. These are the challenges. This is what we run into. We have a lot of experience, but What have your challenges been? Quite a few of you are either deploying or have deployed a connector between these two types of systems in your careers. Some of you recently, from what we're hearing in the polls. So what were the main things that you've run into? Hopefully we don't hear too many all of the aboves to this one, like we heard last time. Hopefully. But what were the primary blockers or primary challenges that you ran into? Is it the buy-in? Is it the knowledge on the teams? Is it maybe the reason why we're hearing some of you say you're not going down the path of integration is because it's daunting? Like you're looking at something where you maybe don't even know where to begin. I've been there personally in my career, when definitely certainly less mature in my career, when I'm asked by my controller, like, hey, do we have the ability to streamline this? And I'm looking at everything, and I was young in my career at the time, and I was just like, I couldn't even tell you. We have 15 payroll vendors, we have 12 HR vendors. How do you even consolidate that? I didn't even know how to approach it at the time, so it came with experience. Let's see what you all have to say here. Wow, a spread. All of the above. Oh, okay.
Wow.
My heart. My heart. So my condolences. But these things, look, these things happen. This is not an easy thing. What we're not here to do is say deploying an integration between two systems, it's easy. What you're trying to achieve is something simplified on, as a result, as an outcome. But no project like this is ever easy, which is why, we are here talking about it for an hour today, how to approach and how to deploy successfully, right? Okay. So with that, over to you, Catherine, to start wrapping us up.
Great. Thank you, Sammy. So just before we hop into some of the Q&A questions, we wanted to let you all know that we have a brand new HCM integration guide, which will pretty much take you through the same process that we've gone through today of project best practices, potential pitfalls, and key considerations. And it is now available to download on our site. So please feel free to scan the QR code on this screen with your phone, or you could visit the link shown here. And actually, I will just go ahead and add this link to the chat for ease of use. All right, and that should now be available to everyone. But just in the last 3 minutes that we have, let's just dive into a few questions. All right, so first question that we have, what are other systems or sources of data that you typically see businesses wanting to integrate alongside their HCM?
That's a good question. So I'll take that one. I would say the primary one is your ERP, right? So your financial platform. One of the things that we're most often asked about is, can you provide either general ledger files as an outcome of payroll that can be imported directly into our ERP, or conversely, can you push that data across, sometimes even to the HCM, like with Workday, for example, Peachy allows for some of that GL data to be pushed directly to Workday. So if you're using Workday financials, it can be manipulated a little bit more before it's actually pre and post posting, let's say, to the ledger, to be redundant there. But many other platforms as well, ad hoc. We're asked about benefit administration platforms, right? You may not have the benefit administration modules with either Workday or your chosen HCM. You may be going elsewhere for your employee facing, especially in the US, India, countries where there's employee election, right? A strong level of employee election to benefits. So benefit modules, pension providers, right? So on the back end of payroll, can you push, let's say, the amounts for 401k, the amounts for pension to our pension provider so those accounts can be funded accurately? We get asked about these things all the time. Not here to really sell CloudPay, but I would say agnostically, I think what you should want is options and flexibility, right? HCM is the primary. You'll hear all global payroll providers extolling the virtues of HCM connection and partnering with different HCM providers because it's the primary integration strategy. But all of these other pieces are important as well. So I think what you're looking for there is flexibility and the ability for essentially your payroll provider to say, yes, we can do that, right? It may not be as something as standardized and let's say certified, like a Workday integration, for example. But the ability to build those ad hoc integrations between the platforms is important. It can be key as well.
Yeah, I think you hit on the big ones there, Sammy. With for us, it's certainly financial, and also workforce planning, and things like headcount planning, that sort of thing. Those are also pretty high on our list.
All right.
Okay.
So I'll just give you guys one more question, and this is something that you both have already touched on, but I just want to see if there's anything else that you wanted to mention. Two-part question. How important is the data quality, and how do we see businesses overcoming these hurdles of data quality?
Tom, I'm going to pass that one right to you. I think people would love to hear how you guys
Yeah,
have tackled that.
absolutely essential data quality, and for us, it was pretty painstaking. We had when we went live with Workday, we had a pretty good sized team of people, probably 10 to 12 people, whose only purpose in life was to orchestrate the conversion of data from PeopleSoft to Workday. And they spent hours with our stakeholders looking at different trends, different data anomalies, and coming up with the correct way to cleanse that. So when we did make that big jump, we took only the cleanest and best data that we could derive from our old system and brought it in. So definitely painstaking, definitely involved. Not going to sugarcoat that at all and say, oh yeah, just clean up your data. It's a mini project within a project.
All right. Well, I think we are pretty much at time. So thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Sammy, and thank you all for joining. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Right.
everyone, for attending.
Thank you very much.